Now we're at our last session of today's conference. We are entering the careers panel. We have Maria Terrace, Aaron Williams, Rolando Rodriguez, and Isabella Rivera as the 4 panelists. And we have 2 student moderators, Shelby and Elsie from Duke University. So I'm going to let them to take over, and thank you all for coming.
Yeah, so as Monica mentioned, Shelby and I are the moderators. We're both undergraduates at Duke, and we're so happy to be here and help facilitate this panel. So to start, I'll just give a quick introduction of our panelists, and then they can go more in depth about their career and background afterwards. So first we have Maria Terrace, who is a senior staff data scientist at Waymo LLC. We then have Aaron Williams, who is a senior data scientist at the Urban Institute. We also have Rolando Rodriguez, who is a supervisory mathematical statistician at the U.S. Census Bureau. And then finally, we have Isabella Rivera, who is a business analyst at New York State Technology and Enterprise Corporation. Now, in the order that I introduced you all, you may expand more your backgrounds and any relevant information you'd like to share.
I think I was first. So I'm Maria Terrace. I am currently a senior staff data scientist at Waymo. If you're not familiar, Waymo is building autonomous vehicles. So if you're in San Francisco or Phoenix or a few other locations, you can hail a car similar to Uber or Lyft, and an empty vehicle will come and arrive at your pickup spot. You'll get in and it'll drive you to your drop-off destination with you as the only passenger in the car, no driver. You'll get out and an empty car will drive away. So this is actually pretty different from where I started. My undergrad, I was really focused on ecology and environmental sciences, and I took a lot of math classes and became a math major just for fun because I enjoyed math. I realized after graduating during an internship with the Bureau of Land Management that I actually really missed statistics and math. And so I went back and did a master's in statistics and then a PhD in statistics at Duke. At Duke, all of my focus was on environmental applications. So I did Bayesian modeling. My favorite project was trying to estimate the impacts of climate change on cherry blossom flowering times 100 years in the future. After Duke, I was sure I was going to go be a professor at a liberal arts school, so I did a postdoc. But at that point, we had a two-body problem, and I ended up in the Bay Area, where I worked for an agriculture company doing a lot of environmental work and statistical modeling for them. I was there maybe 3-4 years before realizing I wanted to change. And I got emails from recruiters at autonomous vehicles companies and was really excited at the idea of an empty car coming and picking me up and driving me around. And now I've been at Waymo about 5 years.
Great, I'm happy to go next. So my name's Aaron. I'm a senior data scientist at the Urban Institute. The Urban Institute's a nonprofit, nonpartisan research institution in Washington, D.C. that focuses on social and economic policy research. And we're like a collection, there's about 600 people there of sociologists, criminologists, economists, data scientists, and the like. I'm also an adjunct professor in the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University, where I teach data science for public policy courses. I studied economics and music as an undergrad and lived in Richmond, Virginia for about a year, and then moved to DC, both to work as a research assistant at the Urban Institute, but also to get a master's while working. And I studied math and stats at Georgetown University. It was tough, to be honest with you, but also it worked out really well, and that I saved a bunch of money. And also the methods classes that I was learning at Georgetown were a really good complement for the sort of more applied policy work that I was doing at the same time at the Urban Institute. I definitely considered a PhD, but decided that it wasn't the best fit for a few different reasons. I like being really social and didn't want to work on my own quite that much. I like being a generalist and working on a lot of different problems. I spoke with people and they told me that I liked programming way too much, and that I should stop learning more programming things if I wanted to do economics or statistics. And really, I like choosing where I live, which if you want to be, a tenure track faculty member can be a big challenge. But I'm very lucky in my work and that I get to write lots of papers and publish in academic journals. I get to fundraise for my work. I get to present at cool conferences, and I still get to write lots and lots of R code.
So I think I'm next. So thank you all for having me. I'm Rolando Rodriguez. I work at the U.S. Census Bureau. You heard from our director earlier. So the U.S. Census Bureau is the largest agency in the federal statistical system. You hear from us pretty often, at least every 10 years, right? So I got my BS in mathematics at the University of Texas at Austin. I wanted to get my master's in statistics after that. Much like Aaron, I decided that getting a PhD wasn't quite the fit for me, partially because I wanted to just kind of use this newfound knowledge I had from my master's in doing stuff. I found an opportunity to do that at the census. I had a fellow student who had gotten their master's at the same time, who started working there, liked it, suggested it might be something I should try. Haven't looked back. I started there in 2005. I've been working there since, much in the area of data privacy and confidentiality. That involves a lot of statistical modeling. It has involved even more and more statistics as we have made moves towards things like differential privacy. That has provided a lot of opportunities for learning new things, publishing new papers, going to lots of new conferences, meeting a new group of people. So that's been a real fun thing, even though, you know, the change to differential privacy has been contentious, to say the least. But contentious means fun, right? As you'll find in life. So looking forward to answering questions, and I hand it off to the expert.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Isabella Rivera. I graduated only last December from Vassar College, and I majored there in mathematics and statistics and got minors in creative writing and computer science. So now I work at the New York State Technology Enterprise Corporation, which is a nonprofit consulting company, and I've worked there since February. I was hired as a data analyst, but actually most of the work that I've done over the past few months has embraced the business analyst side of things as well. So the work I've done has leaned into my understanding of data from my statistics major and statistics work, as well as my communication abilities and writing skills from my writing minor. And that is all.
Great, thank you for all your introductions. Now we'll move on to a few pre-prepared questions and also invite anyone watching to submit questions to the Q&A. So the first question is, are there any non-statistics courses that you think are worthwhile for aspiring data scientists to take?
I guess I'll go first. I do think communication is really important. I think in a lot of roles, especially in industry, you can have a really amazing model, a really amazing method that is fantastic, but if you can't convince anybody that that's true, nothing's going to come of it. And so you need to be able to communicate, you need to be able to write well, you need to be able to speak well and present well. And in particular, you need to be able to explain those complex applications to non-experts in your field. I don't have a specific course I would point to, but I think like a liberal arts education often involves a lot of writing. I think at bigger universities, just making sure you're taking classes and taking that communication aspect really seriously makes a big difference. The other thing I would mention, and sort of the same vein, is getting some hands-on experience with real data. That could be in the form of research or an internship. But I'm really concerned when I meet people, especially stats PhDs, who have only ever worked with simulated data. Simulated data is really nice. It behaves well. Real data is not. Real data is really messy. And so doing some sort of research project could be the best of both worlds, because you get some real data, hopefully, and then you also need to present it at a conference or write a paper and so on.
I thought Maria's answer was really good. I'll just zag and offer maybe a slightly different perspective, and that is, like, I studied music and just like learned a lot of the discipline and accountability compared to people, you know, who take classes that are primarily oriented around tests. So just find something where you are in a play or on a debate team or reading poetry in front of other people and have like individual accountability that forces you to learn and practice things on a regular basis. Because like that's a really big part of being in the labor force, is like forcing yourself to learn new things and then communicate those in front of other people. So just having that type of experience in anything, I think, is very helpful.
Yeah, and I'll say for my work at the Census Bureau, you know, learning a bit about how management works can be very helpful. just because you are going to be in an organization that has a managerial structure and a hierarchical structure. It's good to know what kind of, as you go higher up in organizations, what people are looking to hear from you, because you will sometimes get opportunities to kind of punch above your weight, and it's good to kind of know what you're doing in those situations. So knowing how to talk, knowing how to explain things succinctly to things like senior managers, people like senior managers, can be very helpful. That isn't necessarily something maybe you need to spend credits on, but there's lots online, right? So give it a look and see what the people you're going to be working for might be expecting. So that's what I would suggest.
Okay, thank you all for those great answers. We have a few more prepared questions. One of which is, I know you some of already touched on this in your brief introductions, but would you mind expanding on why did you choose your current career path and how does it align with your goals and interest?
So I think, as I said in the intro, I was sure I was going to end up at a liberal arts college teaching. Monica, I think, stole my future. She's living my dream. And for family reasons, it just didn't play out that way. I have a spouse who also needed a job and also had a PhD in statistics and did not want to live in the middle of nowhere, which is where most liberal arts schools are. I love the middle of nowhere. I don't say that as a bad thing. I think it's a plus. So for me, finding a place and a career where I could have a family and have some stability. Somebody, I think it was Aaron, mentioned wanting to be able to choose where I live. That also has a lot of value. And so industry is what came to my mind at that point. Then, as I said, I was doing a continuation of my previous interests, doing a lot of environmental work in the context of agriculture. And that was a natural stepping stone for me, and I think was a good transition into industry. But in my case, agriculture, the data really came in like once a year. We would design an experiment in March. It would go on the fields. We'd get the data in the fall, and then we'd try again. That's very unusual in tech. Usually you get new data and can run experiments daily, if not more frequently than that. And so my interest and like desire to do bigger and better things and try new things was really where I went. And so for me, again, autonomous vehicles just, I think, is the coolest project you could possibly work on. And so getting that job, I said yes, and I've been here ever since. And so doing something I was really excited about that also met the constraints of my family. That was how I ended up where I am.
Okay, I'll go next. So why did I choose to work at the Census Bureau? I'm talking to here. My kids are in the room. So speaking of, wanting to work where you want to work, right? That suddenly became easier once we were all forced to work virtually. So one of those things I wish had happened earlier in my career before I started paying lots of money to live in DC. So question is like, why, what compels one to go into public service, right? It's obviously not the money. But I didn't come for a lot of money. So I came from a town a couple hours away from where Director Sanchez came from. So I'm from Corpus Christi, Texas. So, got in school, got my master's, took on some debt. You guys might have some experience with that. Said, okay, where can I get a job now? As I said, I had a friend who worked at the Census Bureau. Sounded like interesting work. And something compelled me about like wanting to work in statistics, having gotten a degree in it. Like there was a lot of people who don't work in the field where they get their degree. So I decided to give it a shot, see if government employment was something that would suit me. And I really got into it. Maria is talking about access to real data. Like, well, there you go. Lots of real data to work with. Meaningful decisions are made from that data. And you really start to get into, right? It starts to just become important to you, right? The work I'm doing is informing decisions people make that affect just everyone in the country. That's very compelling. And so it was kind of an opportunity, decided to take the opportunity, found it really suited my skills, and allowed me to feel that my work was important. Maybe the pay is not the greatest, but you know, when you're not used to, when you didn't come from a lot of money, you're like, okay, well, it's more than my dad or mom made, so this is great. And so, yeah, it was just kind of a thing I thought I would try. I didn't have a family at the time when I started. And as Maria said, like that can be very, that's a major deciding factor for a lot of people if they do have families early. So I had a bit of freedom, moved to DC, got a little flat. That was way too expensive, worked for the Census Bureau, got kind of into making major decisions about how modeling would affect, right, the American Community Survey, which is one of our larger surveys. And just haven't looked back since. So yeah, give things a shot if opportunities arise.
All right. Our next question is, how much control do you have over the work you do? Are there any constraints to your job? And if so, what are they?
So okay, at the beginning of my career, you know, you didn't have a lot of control, right? Like there are budgets, right, in the federal government that have been allocated to your bureau that need to go to certain kinds of work. So there was work to be done, right, on a survey that needed some kind of synthetic data done for purposes of protecting people's identities. So that's what I started working on. But I mean, that was something that like fed right into, that's why they hired me, right? They wanted me to do some modeling, and here was a chance to do some modeling. As I have progressed in my career, right, you start to get a little bit more freedom in terms of deciding what kinds of things you want to work on. There are always, in the federal government at least, there can be occurrences that happen that force you to have to do things, right? So when their Census Bureau got sued by the state of Alabama and we needed to make outputs related to that, I had to stop what I was doing and work on those outputs, right? That happens more and more as you move up in the federal government. And once you start taking a managerial role, which I have done, you start to feel more and more the constraints of budget, right? Because here's how much money you have for your staff, but you start to get more freedom in terms of, you know, putting staff on various, where you can put staff on various projects to get kind of the vision of the bureau and your particular part of the bureau done. So you kind of start getting less freedom for yourself, but your freedom is vicariously through your staff, right? And you can fight for their freedom, all right? Make sure they get on projects that they like, that you think are beneficial to the goals of your part of the organization. I don't know how much freedom Rob has. He probably has less freedom than I do, because you need to go talk over here now. So there's kind of a sweet spot. I feel like I'm in a sweet spot. It took 18 years to get there. But yeah, there's definitely opportunities for freedom.
Yeah, I think a lot of that resonated with me as well, though I would say sort of the needs of the company. We are a pre-revenue company, I think is how we describe it. We have not IPO'd yet. We're still a startup effectively. And so there are things that need to get done and benchmarks we need to meet in order to stay afloat. And so that does dictate what some of our work is. That said, within those constraints, I do feel, and to your point, I'm a manager, I'm relatively senior. I have a lot of freedom to say how we're going to meet those goals. I'm told what the goals are, but I do get to decide how we're going to meet them. And I need to deliver. And so if I'm making bad choices, that's not going to be great. But I've been able to be pretty creative in what I'm prioritizing. I think I have a quirk where I find a lot of things interesting. I like learning new things. And so I have a habit of chatting with people who aren't working on hardware and hearing what their problems are and finding that they have a similar problem. And suddenly I've almost created more work for myself, but I prove that it's useful and I prove the value. And the more I do this, where I'm finding the interesting things to work on and proving the impact, the more people trust me and the more freedom I have. So at the very beginning, I didn't have a lot of freedom. I was told what to do, and I had to find my own little pockets of time for these arguably pet projects. And as time went on, people trusted me, and those pet projects grew into entire areas where I now have people working on them and owning them full time. And so I think it changes as you evolve through through your career, but also show that you have good sense, show that you can find interesting things to work on that are important to the company, and you'll find that a lot of doors open for you.
So within, oh, sorry, Aaron. I was going to say within my company, I do have some freedom in the type of work that I can do. I actually had a talk with my supervisor earlier today where she asked me what type of work that I enjoy doing the most. And she said she would give me more of that. So that's wonderful. There are a lot of projects that my company works on. So if I wanted to do something completely different, I could just ask to be put on another project. But I will say, in consulting in general, a lot of what you do is dictated by the client's needs, the client's requests, their asks, and the way that they think things should be the best. You can suggest other avenues, other ways to do things, but in the end, if they don't want to do it that way, then you have to do it the way that they want to.
I'll just add one quick thing here. So there are places like the Urban Institute are soft money, like research organizations. So if you were able to fundraise either from like government contracts or, you know, foundations and grants, you can have a lot of freedom on the types of things that you can do, and having that independence can be really great. You know, be interesting to compare notes with Rolando in a less public forum about that type of stuff. But you know, fundraising to do your work is also a huge drag sometimes, and so there's definitely trade-offs there.
Yeah, thank you all for that. So another question that we have is that since the field of data science and statistics is constantly evolving, I'm wondering, how do you guys keep up with hot topics and trends? And do you sometimes find that your data science role or statistics role kind of substitutes as a research role as well?
How do I keep up with latest trends? Yeah, you read. And, you know, getting out of school does not give you permission to stop learning. And if you do stop learning, you will get left behind, right? So when I first started at the Census Bureau, there wasn't none of this data science stuff, right? That people are talking about in 2005. Now it's everywhere. So you have to kind of teach yourself. Depending upon where you go work, there are probably opportunities for you to get training, either like paid training or to take time from your job to do training that you find alone. You know, use those opportunities to teach yourself. It is always helpful also to go back and reteach yourself things you had learned that you've forgotten. You know, I have to go back to my intro stats books regularly just to remind myself how certain theorems work. So yeah, you just have to kind of keep learning. Does my stats role ever become a research role? I work in the research part of the Census Bureau, so all the time. I will say, to go back to the previous topic, you know, depending upon where you are in an organization, you may or more have more or less chances for freedom, right? Like as a bureau, if you work in an area whose job it is to get a survey out at certain times every year, like that's what you're going to be doing. Some people like freedom, some people don't, right? Some people like the rigor of saying, I know what I'm going to be doing at a certain time, versus research, which can be a little more gelatinous and, you know, hard to just get a foothold in what you want to do. But back to the previous topic, yes, often I will have to do research my stats and data science.
Yeah, I agree with just continuing to learn. I will say that I like going to conferences. I've been to JSM, I think, all of the last years except for the pandemic years. And so I'm regularly there. I try to give talks. I try to speak on panels. And I listen and hear what other people are working on, both in academia and in industry. I feel like there's often not enough cross-pollination between those two groups. One aspect, at Waymo at least, is that our problems are brand new. A lot of the problems we face, nobody in the world, maybe somebody at another AV company has worked on, but they're just brand new problems that there aren't Stack Overflow answers to. And so we have done a lot of research. I published a paper earlier this year on some of the methodology we developed, where even as I was writing it, it felt very contrived. Like no academic would ever think of this problem because the constraints we're having to deal with are so hard to explain unless you're in the environment, that it's not a problem anyone's looked at, and we had to sort of bend over backwards to create new methodology. And I like that, and I find that fun. these days, I don't have a lot of time for it. And so to me, like, how do I bring in those new ideas? It's by hiring people and listening to them. There's a limit to what I will be able to understand and what my background is. I have a PhD in statistics. I know spatial statistics, I know Bayesian statistics. I have a strong stats background. I don't know that much about some other aspects of ML. I don't know that much about certain aspects of computer science. Having other people on my team who are experts in those areas can be really beneficial. And they can teach me, they can teach other people on the org, and we can leverage the strengths and weaknesses of everybody and sort of put them all together to get the best that we can produce.
I'd suggest just teaching, like teaching as much as possible. It forces you to not only learn new things, but also to like reevaluate all the things you know and continue to learn how to reframe them for different students, different learning styles. And, you know, it's nice like having a gig where you teach on a regular basis, but even just like if you're at work, you know, finding places to and outlets to teach. So like one of the reasons I was drawn to the Urban Institute is because we have users groups. And so I got involved with like the R users group and was just like trying to teach, like give talks every single week. And that forced me to kind of continue to learn things.
And thank you all. I know Aaron has mentioned R a couple of times. Another question we have is what coding programs or software do you all find most useful in your line of work?
For me, it's R for sure. I know there are a lot of people on my team who use Python and there's a lot of SQL, but I am almost the only person on the team who uses R. So when there's a problem that really would be solved best in R, they ask me to do it. So that is definitely what I use the most and I think has been really helpful.
I think it depends a little on the nature of the role. I've worked with sort of data analysts who spend their day in SQL, just all day, every day, everything is in SQL. I know R. I used to be very good at writing R. Today I don't write any code, but I used to be very good at R. And it felt that at times it was tolerated, but not really accepted, depending on who I was talking to or who I was interviewing with. There's actually one company I did a coding exercise with as part of the interview where they rewrote the entire problem into R just for me because all of the other candidates did it in Python. Python is more common, at least in the Bay Area and big tech companies. And part of the reason is it's easier to productionize your code if it's written in Python. And so if you're just doing an analysis and writing sort of in like a Jupyter notebook or a Colab or just in an R script, it doesn't really matter what language you're writing in. It's for your own consumption as long as you can find the conclusions and write the plots, great. If other people, especially computer scientists and other parts of the organization, need to be able to run that code on an ongoing basis, my experience is that typically Python is preferred. Although Aaron, as an R lover, I suspect you will object to some of my assertions, but this has been my experience as somebody who prefers R personally.
Yeah, we're definitely like we've got a lot of different programming languages at the Urban Institute, but I think R is a much better fit for the social sciences than Python and for the types of things that the average Urban Institute employee works on. Like the tooling in R is just so much better. These things are going to change. Like I think Julia's really cool and might be worth poking around in. And I think there's a lot of tools that are outside of the languages, in particular Quarto and version control with like Git and GitHub that are also really valuable to know and maybe avoid some of the R versus Python wars.
Yeah, I would say what matters less is, you know, what languages you're using. And like Aaron was just getting at right there is like proper coding standards, right? Using version control, doing unit testing, doing integration testing, all these things where, you know, you're going to have a program that's going to do something meaningful at any point, then it needs to not break. You know, as Maria was saying, like if you're going to production, it needs to be production level code. So having those skills available is helpful. You want a scripting language like R or Python, right? That lets you just do basic problems quickly, right? You just want to you want to just get some normal variates, right? Just go into R, right? To get along with life. But you should definitely know something. I mean, Python works, R can work, right? If you can make R packages, great. And that's a good thing to do, right? Like, what do I need to do to make sure that my R package can get into CRAN, right? If you have those levels of skills, and you can do actual programming that will work for production, even if it's in R.
Yeah, thank you all for all of your insights. Another question that we have, kind of piggybacking off of the coding question, or what are the skills you think will be most valuable in the field of data science in the next 5 years?
I think a lot of things are changing, but the one thing that will never change is the value of like understanding the data that you are using. There's still like a lot of value in subject matter expertise and data expertise, even if, you know, a lot of the methods are changing all the time. I'll just also echo what several people brought up earlier, and that is just communication, right? The ability to communicate complex topics to decision makers in ways that they can digest and make actions upon, I think will also continue to be valuable, sort of no matter what else changes.
I'll stay in the government, at least right now. There's a push for data equity, right? So getting representatives across the entire population in your data. That's going to mean an increasing number of data sources that would be merged together, right? And as Maria said before, real data is messy. So your skills for bringing in data, cleaning data, making data work with other types of data, merging them together, models that account for potential error sources across different, all those different data sets, errors in the merging, errors in how the variables are measured, missing data models, things like that, right? So all these tools that you'll have as a statistician or data scientist when the data aren't just normally distributed.
Great, thank you all. Another question we have, we've talked about this a little bit, but would you mind expanding on your educational background and how it prepared you for your current career?
I mean, I think I've already addressed this more or less, but my undergrad was primarily environmental and ecology and had a math background as well. And so I think those two were really useful going into grad school, because then I had the math foundation for the statistics, but the environmental sort of understanding to really appreciate what we were trying to do with the data sets we were working on, because a lot of our work was at environmental applications. And so I think my undergrad actually worked very well for my grad school applications. And then postdoc, again, statistics, environment. Come to industry. I think I actually had a bit of a bumpy transition to industry, because I think I was at my heart like an academic, and a managerial structure, an open office, stand-up meetings where I had to update people on what I had done in the last day. I found all of that very stressful at the beginning. And so I think that was a gap, but the solid foundation in like statistics and writing and communication, I think those carried over. And at that point, I was able to learn more about industry and industry norms, which helped propel me into success at my current role. I would say that one of the things I've done well in my current role, not to hammer this too much, is like communication. I think I have gotten very good at writing and explaining sort of what it is I'm doing, why we need it, what the cons are, and why it's better than something else, and understanding the needs of the company. If you can say that doing this change will save $800 million, people are more likely to do it than if you just tell them it would be better statistically. People understand the value of money or the value of the impact, and being able to translate it into those terms is helpful. And I would say my liberal arts education is part of why I do that, because I wrote a lot of essays as an undergrad, and a lot of people I work with really did not and aren't used to thinking in that kind of way.
So to expand on my education, like I said, I started off as a chemistry major, actually. Always like blowing stuff up. But then it started to become more mathy, and I was like, well, maybe I should just do math. So I switched to mathematics, got my BS in that, went on to get MS in statistics, focused there. Like my thesis was on hierarchical mixed models. So that was what got, when I applied for the Census Bureau, that's what got the people who interviewed me kind of excited to try to hire me, was that modeling experience. So definitely my educational background was helpful. I will say more and more, as you know, we've been making a shift towards new privacy methods involved, like differential privacy. My math background has become more and more important than it had been before. Simply because it's forcing statisticians to do things in different ways than we're used to. That almost always involves going back to the kind of probabilistic and mathematical underpinnings of statistics, and you know, working directly with those distributions. We as a bureau, we haven't had a major shift towards, right? So, you know, if we think about like data science being more for prediction and statistics being more for inference, we're still kind of in the inferential stage in the terms of what we release, right? Like people want to use our data to fit models that they have that they think explain socioeconomic and other patterns involved, like how people and businesses work. But you know, as data science is becoming more popular and AI is becoming more popular, you know, there has been a push to use more of those methods to try to do the things that we do. I will say, you know, I wish I had a bit more background in that. It just didn't exist when I was in school. So things I've had to teach myself.
I can go next. I mean, I obviously the statistics part is really what drew them to ask me to interview. But I was almost told in the interview that the fact that I had a writing minor was a big part of the reason that they hired me, because as Maria mentioned, the communication is so important. And I feel like especially when you're working with data a lot, there is a problem I've noticed on my team. A lot of the data analysts are not that effective at communication. So the fact that I had that degree writing experience and was good at communicating the results and explaining to people what I had done who didn't necessarily have the same background that I did, was also a huge thing.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. Another question that we have is, would you mind explaining or giving some examples of the projects or problems that you deal with in your position?
So again, I work at an autonomous vehicles company. So these cars drive themselves. And I've had two different roles at Waymo. One is trying to evaluate the performance of the software at the very end of the line before putting it in an empty car on a public road. In that stage, it's really important. Waymo takes safety very, very seriously. We need really high recall on any sort of problematic behavior that we want to limit. And we also want to have reasonable precision, partly for cost reasons. And so a lot of those problems were really interesting from a statistical perspective because they're very rare events. It's finding a needle in a haystack. We drive many, many miles. I don't remember what stats I can give today, but we have lots of miles on public roads and in simulation. Finding the problematic behaviors was really hard. And basically we wanted to find those, count them, estimate their expected frequency in actual on-road operations, and characterize them. What would those events look like if they played out? So that was one role. My more recent role is earlier in the development process. So we have a lot of onboard engineers who are updating our software that drives the car. And they want to make changes to that onboard software that are going to drive well on road, but they want to test that without actually playing out on a public road. So we do a lot of simulations. And in that case, you can actually simulate two different softwares side by side and say, in this intersection full of pedestrians and a kid on a pogo stick, what does the self-driving car do? Did the old software work better or did the new software work better? And then try to actually give those onboard engineers a very fast turnaround signal on whether they've made the improvements we want. I will say defining better is really hard, and that's something I have spent a lot of my time thinking about. I'm a terrible backseat driver these days because I nitpick everything you do as a driver. But there's a lot of different ways you can be a good driver. So simply defining good driving is part of my job. And I wouldn't say that came from my background or educational expertise in any way. But maybe that gives a flavor for what I do. So on-road rates estimation, making sure that we're safe, and helping onboard engineers iterate more efficiently and effectively through side-by-side comparisons.
I'm going to try to answer before Rolando, since we work on similar things. Starting at the Urban Institute, I worked a lot on income and tax and wealth research. And in the social sciences, like having good high quality data is everything. And it was pretty clear that data access, because of threats to confidentiality, there was both opportunity and challenges there. So there are these new sophisticated data privacy or privacy preserving methodologies like synthetic data, like formal and differential privacy, that can both expand access to data and also affect the way that we access existing data. And so it just seemed like a really good opportunity to blend my interest in income, wealth, and taxes with these types of methodologies. And as Rolando already hinted earlier, there's like a lot of demand right now for this expertise and a lot of very important unanswered questions around this. And I see Monica nodding her head too. And so I was just very fortunate to kind of be there and start working on this, even though I could have told you nothing about it 6 or 7 years ago.
So yeah, just to piggyback off of Aaron, then, the bulk of the work we do in the privacy part of the Census Bureau is, I would say, it's making the difference between what data is and what a datum is, right? So you have data associated with yourself, right? All kinds of data. The point of an organization like the Census Bureau is to take that from you and to turn it into inferences you can make about a population, right? What does the US look like? What does your state look like, right? The hard part always is that at some point, detail becomes really detailed, right? So the Census Bureau is one of those organizations that releases like block level detail on people, right? And this becomes problematic, right? Because we have to say, okay, the point of what I'm doing is to not tell you like what Aaron's job is or how much money he makes or what his race is, right? It's to say, oh, statisticians or data scientists in this area make this much money or have this kind of education, right? So our goal is to, release statistics that don't tell you too much about a single person. So that involves a lot of, if I do my job correctly, I make everyone mad, right? Because, Maria was talking about things that are kind of vaguely defined. What is data quality, right? We hear this, what is privacy? What is data quality? Is this data private enough? Does it have enough? Is it quality enough to make your decisions? Everyone has their own metric, right? And so no matter what you do, you're going to make someone mad. They're going to say, well, you did things in a way that I don't have the kind of data quality I need to make that decisions. At the same time, for instance, the parameters we had chosen for protecting the 2020 census are probably higher than any privacy researcher would want, right? So they're probably not happy. So you'll find this as you get further in your career, like, it's not so much if you make everybody happy, something's wrong. And what you really should be causing is not general, you shouldn't be creating consensus through just no effort. It should take a lot of work to reach that. And so the more you have people clamoring, the more you have people talking, then you're being successful, I would say.
All right, thank you all so much for your time and your insights. We are at time, I believe. So Elise and I will hand it off for closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, Shady, and of course, every panelist being here. Yeah, so the closing remarks will be super short. Thank you everyone else for coming for this year's Electronic Undergraduate Statistics Research Conference. We hold this every year, so stay tuned for next year's conference, which again will happen in November, typically the first Friday. And of course, we have all of this student project competitions going on. So mark your calendar. I think the deadline for this fall is going to be December 20th. And please look up on our website in terms of what types of projects you can submit to, what types of competitions you can join. And I will also mention that during the poster session earlier today, we're able to identify a winner of this year's best poster session. This is Dinan El-Silat from Harvard and her team. So we will reach out to the winners with the certificate and everything else later on. With that, I thank you everyone again to join us. And also thank you, Andrew, for helping out setting up the whole conference, running the background work and all that. And once again, I see all of the panelists are still here. So thank you all again, and all of the previous speakers and the panelists. And we hope you enjoy the conference this year, and we hope we will see you next year in November 2024. With that, I will say bye and have a good weekend, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.